don't want to leave that out, because that is really a lovely blessing that we have. I suppose the very obvious reason that one begins to think about old age a lot is when you realize it's upon you, and you said it doesn't happen slowly. There comes a moment when you face the fact that both you and your husband are going to be in your 90s, that you suddenly think, well, how has it been, and how's it going to be, and what more is there coming? Because you can't expect to live a long time after 90. So you reach a point where you don't make plans anymore the way you used to. Like 2 years from now, I'm going to go to Australia, or something like that. You think, yay, I'm never going to go to Australia. That's not a very likely thing. And then you begin to cast other things in that particular lighting, and you see things differently and feel things differently. But I think the thing that I had on my mind and felt responsible for was when I discovered that as I looked at the stages, the 8 stages, I realized all of a sudden that what we had decided was a good way to put the final stage, the 8th stage, that was not necessarily right. It was just plain wrong, because all the other parts of the life cycle, as you experience them, and you are in contact with it and know what's going on to a certain extent. Not entirely, of course, but before you get through with it, through that stage, you really know that you have been coping with the problems that are suggested in the very naming of the stages. Generativity, which is the one just before the last one, you're feeling very strongly about that, and particularly when you think, well, what have I done? And you get to be 90. So then you get to be 90, and you think, well, now what do I feel about wisdom and integrity? And unfortunately, for the old person, you don't feel very great about it, because you don't feel wise, and you don't feel that you have, as it were, conquered integrity or really come to grips with it actively enough to say you've got it, or you think you've got it, which you never do. So that wisdom and integrity are things that other people might see in an old person, but it's not something that old person is feeling. And that's what kind of roused me to see what it was that old people do feel, and what they have to face at that point as far as their lives are concerned.
In 1950, a middle-aged child psychologist, Erik Erikson, and his wife, Joan Erikson, were challenged to write a description of healthy personality development. They conceived of a chart of the 8 stages of the life cycle. This stage theory was part of his well-known book, Childhood and Society, which was published 2 years later. 30 years later, Joan Erikson created a tapestry to illustrate how the biological and social endowments of a person get interwoven with their life experiences to create the unique life cycle each of us experiences. The Erikson's life cycle stage theory starts with 8 age-related stages: infancy, toddlerhood, early childhood, middle childhood, adolescence, young adulthood, middle age, and old age. They also propose that there are 8 major conflicts, what they called crises, that all humans face in the course of their lives. These are trust versus mistrust, autonomy versus shame and doubt, initiative versus guilt, industry versus inferiority, identity versus role confusion, intimacy versus isolation, generativity versus stagnation, and integrity versus despair. These conflicts are present throughout the life cycle and are especially potent during certain life stages. These age-related stages have come to be labeled by their central conflict, but it is important to note that all of the conflicts are always present. For example, adults are still coping with determining who they are, or establishing identity versus role confusion. This is the central conflict of adolescence. Rising from the conflicts of each stages are positive personal characteristics which the Eriksons called personal strengths. The life stages are more fully elaborated in a previous film of ours entitled Erik Erikson, A Life's Work. During their long careers, both Erik Erikson and Joan Erikson continued to write of the life cycle and its implication for human development. In this film, Joan Erikson, now 90, revisits the life cycle, particularly old age. As it was originally written, the central conflict of this stage was between integrity and despair, with the resulting strength of wisdom emerging.
Well, actually, what you feel is when somebody turns to you and says, "Oh yes, now you're in the 8th stage." Well, that's wisdom and integrity, and you think, "How do I feel standing up there and being wisdom and integrity?" And you feel like the emperor in the story, but he didn't have any clothes on at all when he finally faced reality. that you come out very, very bare. You have nothing to offer that you think touches on those things, and it makes you thoughtful. It doesn't mean that you don't have them in mind, but that you question them. You question the fact of whether you're ever going to have what we used to think, which was a lot of knowledge made for wisdom. And now we suddenly, or at least I suddenly realized that having a lot of knowledge isn't going to help anybody. There's so much that you don't have and are never going to have that it's a pittance compared to what you might have accumulated in those years. But what you do have is a sense that nobody's going to have wisdom in the way that we thought of it. They may have some very good ideas and some wisdom about elements of their lives, but a wise person is very hard to find, and that is interesting for you to consider when you want to think about who the wise people of the world have been. And I think that the dictionary itself gives you the clue, if you look it up, that really being wise is know how to, not know something. Because if you know how to, then you're resilient. You can move from this to that and so on. And to know how to is the epitome of wisdom, really. And you've had a lot of it in sprinkles all the way through your life, but you don't suddenly feel blessed with it in quantity just because you're older. And that's so that's off the beat. The other word that we've discussed, integrity, is just as problematic, if not more so. And I think that for what I thought to do about trying to figure out what it was to look it up. I looked it up in small dictionaries, and they never said enough. They gave you a clue, but it wasn't all that I needed. And finally, I looked it up in the Oxford, great, big dictionary that barely can hold on your lap, and I found I found it in there, and it was amazing to me to see how much of a page it took up. The whole half of one big sheet was showing the word, and then all of the little bits of it that have gone down the line all the way to the bottom of the page, piece about that long. And way down on the bottom of the page, you come to the word, and you wouldn't believe what it is. It's tact. And if that isn't amazing, so you think, what in the world does that mean? Well, then you look and see that it means contact, intact, and what I like to think of, it includes tactful. And that seems to me to be really the word that describes how you relate to other people, to other things also, but particularly to other people, because if you are tactful, then you have taken into consideration who they are, where they are, what they are, and give them full credit, and somehow manage to make a contact with them that makes you empathic and interested and open to their friendship and their acquaintance and their understanding. And that I liked so much, I just felt like saying, hallelujah, I finally found something that really means something to me, because touching and doing and making and the contact that you have with all materials and everything in the world is so important to what life for me has been, that to find out that that is really the source of integrity, or at least the beginning source of it, that seemed to answer many, many questions for me and to make it come alive in a wonderful way. But there are other things you have to figure out what the most important things for you to do are, and do them, and to accept the fact that there are plans that you should make. Everybody says that it's a good idea to lighten your load. It's like walking up a hill, and then you realize that the load that you're carrying isn't worth the trouble, isn't worth the strength that it takes to keep it with you. And you begin to gladly just drop this bit here and this bit here and be freer to get up that steep hill. And that's good. But there's some things you just can't let go. And that is that you are responsible for the welfare of your body. Let go doesn't mean just go plump and just decide you're old and now everybody else should wait on you and do the chores. You have to keep your body in good shape. And you owe that to yourself and to your family and to everyone you know that you care about. And that means in every way, and that's not easy, because there are certain ailments that come upon you in old age that really make you very vulnerable, make it miserable for everybody else. Incontinence is one of those things. And nobody even thinks about that when they're young. But you have to begin to think about it and learn to do the proper exercises and find out what they are if you're going to be a useful member of society at all. Because you can't go out of the house at that point unless you have been able to exercise those muscles and keep them under control as long as possible. But nobody wants to talk about that. That's not a very attractive topic. So it's not brought up. Nobody talks about it. Well, I think that retirement has been a big problem for many people, and it's a problem in both directions. It's a problem for the people that have found great satisfaction in their work and are really very much at the height of their powers, really, when it comes time to retire and to be retired. When we did the survey of these families that we did with vital involvement in old age, I remember there was one man who was very influential and a splendid person who was being told that time had come when he should retire. And his whole enthusiasm, his whole focus in life had been on that job and on that kind of work. And he was at a loss. He was really sick with it in a way. So he undertook, with a little prodding, to start a beautiful garden in the land next to his house, which had not been cultivated at all. And he just went to work and worked like a Trojan, and got so much satisfaction out of it that he then built a hothouse and put some more plants in there, and could turn his attention to that. But many people aren't that resilient, and they also miss the companionship of the other people in the company and in the department, and it ages them, and they are apt to let go and give up much earlier than they would have otherwise. But the story that I always like to remember is the one that Margaret Mead told us one time in a lecture, which was about the red-tailed deer in Alaska. And I'm not sure I ever saw a red-tailed deer, but the story goes that in winter, or when times are hard, the does, the old does, take over the leadership of the whole herd, because the younger bucks have all been killed off, and they fight with one another for supremacy all the time, and in the end they are diminished in number, and then there remain a lot of these does. And when troubles come to in a season where the herd is at a loss as to where to go for water or for green grass, the old does remember where it was sometime in the past, and they lead off the whole group to find that patch of green grass or that stream of water or a puddle somewhere, or maybe a cliff behind which you can hide when it's very stormy and windy, and you can get a little respite from the winds. And then they are the caretakers of the group and the leaders of the group, and know how to lead them into a safer place. That's kind of a nice thought. If we thought we could manage that, that would probably be a very good program for us to have. What do we remember, and how do we manage to lead? But we've never been assigned to the leadership of the group, and so we've never experienced that kind of need for our presence in the world. And I think that a lot of people will feel that having a population that is so full of old women will not be all that fine, because they will be poor. There's no doubt about it. And that is too bad, but can't be. I think it has to be faced, like a lot of the other things that we're finding out. And then I think really it's terribly important, maybe it's above everything else, that you should enjoy, that you should laugh and sing and dance and make merry as much as possible. And it used to be felt that when you got to be older, I know my grandmother wore a little cap on the top of her head. I don't know what it was all about. It was just a little lace cap that proved that she was old and kept her hair tidy, perhaps. And the idea for her that you would ask her to sing or dance or play was really absolutely not possible in those days. You wore long, long skirts, and your clothes were not conducive to much movement anyhow. And I think we've come to a point where we should insist upon it, that if you feel like doing any of those things, they are perfectly appropriate for the aged. And I'd like to see a lot more dancing. We had one performance around here, one performing group that was kind of intergenerational dance, and that was really simply wonderful. There were very young people, and they would do what they could do, which the next oldest group couldn't quite do, but they did something approximately, and then the next older group did what they could, and the very old ones in the back were just moving any old way that the music demanded of them, and thoroughly enjoying it within the bounds of what they were capable of. And it seemed a very appropriate way for people to feel free to do these things. I think one great bonus is, if you're old, to belong to a group or to meet with a group sometime of older people and just see how they're facing their problems, so that you're not always with people younger and have to tell them about it, but you compare notes with these people who are in the same age group, and it's really fun to hear how they all giggle and laugh about their infirmities. It is very encouraging. And of course, finally, I think it's very important to find a model, somebody who really demonstrates how serene and responsive, unruffled and appreciative and deliberately retired somebody can be. And I think that's marvelous. And I think you should look for them, one should look for them, and rejoice when you find somebody like that, because it's a skill that we learn the hard way. Oh, well, Eric's my model. He's wonderful. He just is, he's just retired. He's comfortable where he is. He responds to all approaches that are tacit and tactful and so on. People who come in to the door saying, "Eric, how are you today?" Just get a cursory look. I mean, what is a man supposed to say? He's sitting there looking out the window, and what should he say? Well, I'm this and this and this and this. It's a ridiculous question, and it should not be undertaken by people. They should have more sense than to come on like that. But it's very usual, I'll tell you. But he responds. He responds to the proper tone, the proper touch, the proper approach in any way. And so he is with it without being verbal about it. And that, I think, is a wonderful capacity. He does talk. He talks sometimes in a mixture of English and German, which I can latch into fairly well, but for most people it doesn't convey a great deal. And that's all right. That's the way it could be too. I read a thesis of a friend who is writing one on what's called integrity producing care of old people in a facility for older people. And it was very nicely written. It was very good and had a lot of good points in it. But the title of the thing was Integrity Producing Facilities and Actions with Demented Patients. And that was what I hit the ceiling about, because that word is just not accurate or possible to use for anyone whose senses are still active and who is enjoying and taking part in the life about him or herself. It seems as though we feel that if you don't use words, you are kind of a goner. You know, you're not to be approached. You can't communicate with this person. And so I asked the question finally, would it ever occur to you to call an infant or a young child who yet doesn't speak demented? And of course nobody would. Everybody knows you don't demand words from children who haven't learned them yet. And it makes me very sad also that when they do begin to use words, that's what we praise most highly. We don't necessarily praise their other qualities, the other qualities which they have there and which they have developed in order to be able to commune with other people and to connect with them. They don't get any compliments for that, but they say a word and then everybody rises to the occasion. Oh, isn't he clever? He said a word. He's going to be bright. He's going to be intelligent. Nuts. We have been taught by Oliver Sacks, for instance, who wrote that wonderful book, Awakenings, that there is no word that you can use that covers the whole territory. There are various parts of the brain, and when they are weakened in some way, they react and make it impossible for you to remember names, and I know all about that. Can't think of the name of somebody just when your sister maybe. I remember her name when the moment comes to introduce her. And that's very trying because it is ridiculous. And there are other parts of the brain that make it, if they're damaged in some way or weakened, make it impossible for you to recognize faces. And this is another real set of problems for the individual. And so on. There are innumerable centers of the brain which are damaged from time to time, or in old age particularly. And you can't just cover the whole territory with one word like dementia. And if you don't make contact one way, try another, and then try another, and another. I mean, you'll get there if you make up your mind that you really want to have contact with this person. And touch is, of course, the way that is the truly close one, because it's the first sense that we develop in utero. And we have that very strongly, and it goes right on through life and is majorly a dependable item when you get to be old. We avoid the subject of death a lot, especially when we're talking about our own. And if you mention your own death, everybody kind of pulls back and cringes and says, "Oh, well, now don't let's think about that." But yeah, I want to think about that, and I want to think about other people's death. It's interesting, and it's there, and you have to deal with it and cope with it in your mind. And I think that's good for us. And how you get ready for it and what you do about it is another whole batch of questions. But it is interesting that all of these things don't come upon you till you reach a stage which is unequivocally where you are and what you are going to face from here on. Well, there are a number of things that you do have to keep in mind. You have to be quite convinced and placid about the thought that it's there and it's coming upon you and it's coming upon everybody else and everything else in the world that's alive, and that is it's the wheel of life that we know and have heard about always, but we don't take seriously when we're young. And then you do when you're older. I think one of the things you have to do is to expect it. And that then doesn't come upon you as a shock. You just say, yeah, I expect to die now. I didn't before, or I was avoiding it very often, I'm sure. But now I am expecting it, and now it's perfectly obvious that I should have been all along, because it was very close, all along. Did you ever take a good look at the woven life cycle? Look at the woven life cycle. What you have is a whole band of weaving. And you have a whole bunch of what was the warp down below that just dangles there. Now all of those strengths are in that warp right there in utero. And it begins right then. All of these things that go wandering up the whole life cycle. And at certain stages they're under perhaps more stress because of where your body is at that time, or where your family is at that time, or what is going on in your life. There's a historical trend to this too, which has a great deal to say about how much you're experiencing of something. But from the very beginning, and such a little line is that first line, you know, down there. It's only about 3 times across with the with the weft to fill in that first baby gap. And all of that stuff that was in utero is there. The thing that shades it and makes it different for different people, and everybody would have to make their own, would be that more gray gets put into places that have been bleak in whatever way. And so if you get more gray in, that means that strength isn't there in that time when it should have been developed. It should have been stronger. And you can make up for it anywhere along the line, because it's there again. It's in the warp. And you just have to make it come out and leave as much gray out as possible. And then you've got a bright, bright color and strong capacities. And I feel that it's a shame that people think at all that anything is cut off. Nothing is ever cut off. It's just always potential. But it sometimes doesn't have enough strength to maintain itself and exert its strength along the line. Then, of course, when you get to the top, you have what's left of the warp up there. You know, it dangles up here. And I always call those fringe benefits. That's what you mean after you die. What have you got? Fringe benefits. Be resilient. I can't think of anything that's more important to have as a real kind of catchword. You have got to be resilient, and you've got to be, in that sense, ready to learn something new. And that's part of the resiliency, that you see this isn't working, that isn't working, then you have to find something else and do it, and keep open the idea that you can do all these things. You probably can do them if you just make up your mind that that's what you will do well and can make a success with. I don't know any other inclusive enough word to use for the life cycle. I don't think you can advise anybody what to do, except that they should go on becoming. The one thing that I think is hopeless is stultifying, is find yourself in a trap and do nothing about it. I mean, that I think is inexcusable. You have to you have to keep on doing the next thing, making the change, making the firm resolve to do something about the change that will stop the inertia that would really result in bitterness and nothing.
How come you agreed to do this interview with us?
I don't know.
Yes, you know what we would have done to the throat.
Come on, answer that. How come you agreed to do this interview?
I was thinking about resilience.
What was the motivation?
Well, I feel very strongly about the things that I was talking to you about at first, about aging and so on, and the fact that we owe this apology to the people who have depended on the fact that when they get to be 90, they're going to feel so wise and integrated that it's going to be gorgeous, and it isn't at all, you know. I feel as if we owe an apology to all of them, saying, "Well, that wasn't it. We hadn't been there, and so we didn't know the difference, and we shouldn't have made it up. We should have gone and talked to a lot of wise old people. Maybe we would have learned." But anyhow, I felt the need to write this and to do it. I don't want to write this now, actually. I would rather do other things. There are things that I want to finish that aren't done yet. And yet I'd like to have it somewhere. And so I thought, well, shucks, maybe I'll just talk to you and tell you, and then and then I won't have to write this. You can use it any way you like in what you put together. It doesn't matter a bit to me, as long as you say what I said.